After a Union victory at South Mountain and a Confederate one at Harper's Ferry, Robert E. Lee's first invasion of the North was unraveling, and he decided to risk one final stand to salvage what remained of his Maryland campaign. With Federal troops closing in from the east, Lee chose ground a mile east of Sharpsburg, where Antietam Creek wound through open, rolling farmland, ideal terrain for long-range artillery and maneuvering infantry. The creek ran deep and could only be crossed at 3 stone bridges, making the position naturally defensible against a much larger pursuing force. On September 15th, Lee deployed his troops behind the creek to await George McClellan's Army of the Potomac. Lee's force on hand numbered no more than 18,000 men, roughly a third the size of the approaching Union Army. The first 2 Union divisions reached the field that afternoon, with the bulk of the rest of the army arriving by late evening. Despite holding an overwhelming numerical edge and the chance to strike before Lee's scattered divisions could reunite, McClellan, cautious by nature and convinced Lee might have as many as 100,000 men waiting at Sharpsburg, delayed his attack for a full day. That single day's delay gave the Confederates precious time to dig in along the ridgelines, and gave Lee's missing divisions time to close the gap and reach the field. On the evening of September 16th, McClellan finally ordered Joseph Hooker's First Corps across Antietam Creek to probe the Confederate position. One division cautiously engaged John Bell Hood's troops near the East Woods, the opening move in McClellan's broader plan to overwhelm Lee's left flank the following morning. The skirmish, however, tipped Lee off to McClellan's intentions well ahead of time. He shifted men leftward to meet the coming blow and sent urgent orders to 2 divisions still marching toward the field, Lafayette McLaws with 2 divisions and A.P. Hill with 1. McClellan's overall battle plan suffered badly from poor coordination. The broken wooded terrain made it difficult for his corps commanders to track events outside their own immediate sectors, and his own headquarters sat more than a mile behind the front line, leaving him with little real control once the fighting began. This lack of coordination very nearly canceled out the Union's 2-to-1 numerical advantage outright, and it allowed Lee, working with a far smaller staff, to continually shift his thin defensive line to meet each new Union threat almost as soon as it appeared. At dawn on September 17th, Hooker's First Corps opened the battle with an assault toward the plateau holding the Dunker Church. Facing him was Stonewall Jackson's wing of roughly 8,600 men, with divisions under Alexander Lawton and John R. Jones stretched from the West Woods, across the turnpike, and along the southern edge of Miller's cornfield, with 4 brigades held in reserve in the woods. Union troops drove the Confederates back from the East Woods into the West Woods, but as they advanced, they came within range of Confederate artillery, which opened up in what Lee's men later called artillery hell, inflicting heavy losses on both sides. Union General James Ricketts then pushed an overwhelming assault that dislodged the Confederate line entirely, until Lee, seeing the position near collapse, rushed in reinforcements under John Bell Hood. Hood's 2,300 men, pulled from their first hot breakfast in days and furious about it, drove back into the West Woods with such ferocity that they stopped the line from breaking, though at heavy cost. Hooker's men, after 2 hours of fighting and 2,500 casualties, ended up almost exactly where they had started. The cornfield itself became a slaughterhouse of close combat, rifle butts and bayonets in corn too tall to see through, officers shouting orders no one could hear over the din. The field changed hands an estimated 15 times that morning, in what many accounts call some of the war's most savage fighting. McClellan then ordered Hooker to keep pressing the Confederate left, while sending Joseph Mansfield's corps to strike the center instead. But seeing Lee's reinforcements pouring into the woods and cornfield, Mansfield diverted his own men there to help rather than follow orders. Forced to dismount when his horse balked at a fence, Mansfield was fatally shot moments later, almost certainly by a Union soldier who mistook him for a Confederate scout. At nearly the same moment, Hooker was shot in the foot, costing the Union 2 corps commanders within minutes of each other. General Alpheus Williams took over with almost no information, but pushed the assault forward anyway, driving toward the Dunker Church Plateau as Edwin Sumner's 2nd Corps arrived to join the fight. The Confederates held their ground and, after shifting troops north from quieter sectors, launched a counterattack that cleared the woods and drove the Union back again. When William Franklin's 6th Corps arrived eager to attack, Sumner, who had just been forced into retreat, argued for pulling back further instead, and the 2 commanders clashed openly over what to do next. By the time the morning's fighting subsided, nearly 13,000 men had fallen on both sides, including the 2 wounded or killed Union Corps commanders, and for all the carnage, the woods and cornfield had done little but change hands again and again. By midday the fighting shifted to the Confederate center, where D.H. Hill's men held a sunken farm lane that would become known as Bloody Lane. Wave after wave of Union assaults broke against the position and failed, and a Confederate counterattack launched from the lane was thrown back in turn. The position finally gave way through confusion rather than force. When Confederate troops on the flank were ordered forward to outflank the attackers, a misunderstood command sent them retreating instead, triggering a chain reaction that collapsed the entire line. Bloody Lane fell to the Union, and by this stage only a thin screen of Confederate troops remained to defend the southern end of the battlefield. Union forces under Ambrose Burnside were then ordered to storm the stone bridge over Antietam Creek and seize the high ground beyond it. The Confederates defending the crossing, what would later be remembered simply as Burnside's Bridge, fought stubbornly from the heights above, but with most of Lee's strength already committed to the fighting in the north, they were heavily outnumbered and were eventually driven back. By now the battle in the northern sector had ground to a halt entirely. Lee's men there were dead, wounded, or simply too exhausted to keep fighting any longer. Lee's one remaining hope rested on reinforcements he had summoned before the battle even began. The division of A.P. Hill, marching hard from Harper's Ferry to reach the field in time. Its leading elements began arriving just as the Union pressed its advantage along the southern flank. Despite a promising start, the Union assault stalled as Hill's exhausted but perfectly timed troops piled into the fight, and the advantage swung back and forth several times as both sides fed in whatever men they had left to give. The fighting never resolved into a clean breakthrough. It simply ground down into a stalemate that held until darkness finally ended the day's combat. By nightfall, the Union had lost roughly 12,500 men killed or wounded, the Confederates about 10,500, staggering losses on both sides relative to the Army's size, with no clear victor to show for any of it. Lee's battered army held the field through the night, and his own staff urged him to withdraw across the Potomac while he still could. Lee initially refused to abandon the ground, but was eventually persuaded to pull back. In roughly 12 hours of fighting, nearly 25,000 Americans had been killed or wounded, making it the single bloodiest day in the nation's history.